Some cars are born great, some cars have greatness thrust upon them, and some cars, like the Jaguar XJ220, arrive in a complete and utter shambles, causing monumental arguments costing a fortune, only to become legends decades later. It's a machine that promised the world on a silver platter and then delivered it on a slightly tarnished, much smaller plate. It was supposed to be the definitive hypercar, a V12-powered all-wheel drive monster that would obliterate everything from Ferrari, Lamborghini. What turned up in showrooms, however, was something different. It was a car that sparked lawsuits, fury, financial ruin for some of the people who put down deposits. The central question, then, is a simple one. Or was it an engineering masterpiece, a victim of circumstance and bad timing that never got the credit it deserved? This isn't just the story of a car, it's a drama filled with passion, betrayal, and astonishing speed. It's the tale of how a group of blokes working in their spare time accidentally created one of the most controversial and desirable cars in history. A car that was, for a very long time, seen as a failure. Glorious, magnificent, unbelievably fast failure. The problem with the XJ220 is that it was born from a pure, brilliant idea. And pure, brilliant ideas rarely survive contact with reality, especially the reality of building and selling cars for a profit. The dream was simple: build a Jaguar that could do 220 miles per hour. That's it. A big, hairy-chested number that would put Jaguar back on top of the supercar world. But the path from that simple number to a car sitting in a customer's driveway was twisted, complicated, littered with compromises. Every great story needs a humble beginning, and the XJ220s is properly brilliant. It didn't start in a sterile, white-walled boardroom with pie charts and marketing executives. It started with a group of engineers who were simply bored. At the head of this pack was Professor Jim Randall, Jaguar's Director of Engineering. He looked at the automotive landscape of the mid-1980s and saw Ferrari and Porsche having all the fun. He decided that Jaguar, a company with a legendary racing history, needed to get back in the game. He wanted to build a spiritual successor to the glorious XJ13, a car that could take on the world. So, Randall assembled a small secret team of about a dozen volunteers from the engineering and design departments. Because this was an unsanctioned, off-the-books project, they couldn't work on it during company time. Instead, they met after hours on weekends. They became known as the Saturday Club, a bunch of enthusiasts rather than employees clocking in. These weren't just employees clocking in, they were enthusiasts, giving up their free time for no extra pay, tea biscuits, the insane ambition to build the fastest car on the planet. They had no official budget, so they had to beg, borrow, scrounge for parts and resources. Their goal was simple and audacious. They wanted to create a road car capable of reaching 220 miles per hour. This wasn't a random number plucked from the air. It was a direct challenge to the likes of the Ferrari F40 Porsche 959. Hitting 220 miles per hour would make their car unequivocally the fastest production car in the world. This target became the car's entire identity, its reason for being. Everything about the project was geared towards achieving that magical number, and it's right there in the name, XJ220. It was a statement of intent, a promise written in steel and aluminium before a single bolt had been turned. The Saturday Club worked in secret, sketching designs, building models, cobbling together a proof of concept. They envisioned a car that was pure Jaguar, but turned up to 11. It would have a massive, naturally aspirated V12 engine, because a proper flagship, Jag, has 12 cylinders. It would have a sophisticated all-wheel drive system for incredible grip and stability at high speed, and to top it all off, it would have dramatic scissor doors, because nothing screams supercar of the future quite like doors that go up instead of out. This was not just a car, it was a fantasy made real by a handful of dedicated blokes after everyone else had gone home. After years of secret weekend work, the moment of truth arrived. In October 1988, at the British International Motor Show in Birmingham, Jaguar pulled the silk sheet off the XJ220 concept car. and the world's collective jaw hit the floor. This wasn't just another concept, it was a thunderclap. The car was enormous, it was impossibly low, it was achingly beautiful, it was nearly 7 feet wide, it was longer than a Rolls-Royce. It stood only as high as a man's belt buckle. It looked less like a car and more like a spaceship that had decided to grace the NEC. It completely overshadowed everything else at the show. The specifications were the stuff of schoolboy dreams. At its heart, 6.2-litre, quad-cam, 48-valve V12 engine, a direct descendant of Jaguar's endurance racing power plants. It was said to produce over 500 horsepower. That monstrous engine was paired with an advanced all-wheel drive system, developed by FF Developments, famous for high-performance 4x4 systems. Add the scissor doors, the sleek aerodynamic body designed by Keith Helfert, the promise of a 220 mph top speed. You had a recipe for hysteria. The public and the press went absolutely berserk. Jaguar's stand was mobbed for the entire duration of the show. People were literally throwing blank checks at the company's chairman, Sir John Egan. Jaguar hadn't actually planned to put the car into production. It was meant to be a spectacular showcase, a rolling piece of brand marketing. But the response was overwhelming, utterly bonkers. They were forced to reconsider. The company took around 1,500 deposits of $50,000 each. The dream of the Saturday Club had suddenly become a very serious business proposition. Of course, this is where the trouble started. The car on the stand was a concept, a beautiful hand-built one-off but not production ready. It was overweight, nearly 1,800 kilograms, and nobody had tested if it could reach the claimed top speed. The public didn't see the practical challenges. They saw a V12, all-wheel drive god king of the road. They had fallen in love with a promise. Jaguar had taken a very large number of very large deposits based on that promise. The stage was set for a fall from grace of epic proportions. We need to get to the bottom of how this British bulldog went from being the star of the show to the villain of the piece and then somehow redeemed itself. This is the story of the Jaguar XJ220. Riding high on the wave of motor show hysteria, Jaguar now faced a monumental headache: how to actually build this thing. The company was in the middle of developing other more sensible cars like the XJ40 Saloon. They simply didn't have the resources. They simply didn't have the expertise. They simply didn't have the factory space. They needed a partner who knew how to build ridiculously fast cars. They needed a partner who could also win races. The obvious choice was Tom Walkinshaw Racing, TOR. Tom Walkinshaw was a hard-nosed Scottish racer and team owner. He'd been running Jaguar's hugely successful endurance racing program. TOR and Jaguar had formed Jaguar Sport to handle performance versions. Jaguar Sport was then tasked with engineering and producing the XJ220. On paper, it looked like a match made in heaven. TOR brought motorsport know-how. TOR brought engineering agility. TOR brought a reputation for getting things done. Tom Walkinshaw wasn't a man who messed about. He was there to turn the romantic Saturday Club dream into a cold, profitable production car. The project was greenlit and a new factory was set up in Bloxham, Oxfordshire. TOR's engineers took a long, hard look at the 1988 concept car. They quickly realized the original design was deeply flawed for production. It was too big. It was too heavy. When the final production specifications for the XJ220 were announced, the sound of 1,500 wealthy car enthusiasts collectively crying "What?" echoed around the world. The changes were not minor tweaks. They were fundamental alterations to the car's very soul. First, and most shockingly, the glorious 6.2-litre V12 was gone. In its place was a 3.5-litre V6 with two massive turbochargers strapped to it. This was not just any V6, it was a highly developed racing engine with its roots in the monstrous Group BMG Metro 6 R4 rally car. It was compact, lightweight, and capable of producing a colossal 542 horsepower. but it was not a V12. The second bombshell was the drivetrain. The sophisticated, high-tech all-wheel drive system had been unceremoniously dumped. The production XJ220 would be rear-wheel drive only. This, combined with the smaller engine, meant the car's entire layout could be changed. The wheelbase was shortened significantly, making the final car much more compact and agile than the enormous concept. And finally, for reasons of practicality and cost, the dramatic scissor doors were replaced with conventional ones. The car, that had wowed the world in 1988, had been transformed into something very different indeed. Jaguar and TWR weren't just being difficult. The engineers had very good reasons for making these drastic changes, and they all came back to one thing: hitting that 220 kWh target. When they properly analyzed the original V12 concept, they realized it was a dead end. It was simply too heavy. V12 engine all-wheel drive system were anchors. No amount of power could push that much mass through the air. The car would have been fast, a land yacht, not a rapier. The switch to the twin-turbo V6 was a masterstroke of engineering pragmatism. The V6 had an impeccable racing pedigree. It was incredibly light and compact, so engineers could place it lower and further forward in the chassis. That improved center of gravity and handling balance. More importantly, it could produce immense power. As a modern race-proven design, it was easier to meet early 90s emissions rules, something the V12 would struggle with. Ditching AWD was about weight and complexity. AWD adds hundreds of kilograms, starting with the transfer case, front differential, drive shafts, hubs, and structural reinforcement, making the car rear-wheel drive shed massive weight. Weight is the single most important factor in making a car fast. A lighter car accelerates faster, brakes harder, and turns more sharply. It also needs less power to hit a given top speed. Scissor doors were a casualty of practicality, complex, heavy, and hard to seal properly. Conventional doors were cheaper, lighter, and they worked. In the end, the changes served performance. The production XJ220 was shorter, lighter, and more powerful than the concept. Engineers concluded the V12 concept was the wrong tool for the job. They weren't cutting costs for the sake of it. They made hard choices to meet the goal. The problem was communication. Focused on engineering, they failed to manage customer expectations tied to the V12 fantasy. They delivered a technically superior car, but they broke the emotional contract they had made. The announcement of the final specification, coupled with a staggering price hike, lit a fire under the well-heeled deposit holders. The final price for the XJ220 was confirmed at an eye-watering £470,000. This was a colossal sum in 1992, far more than the £350,000 that had been initially suggested. So customers were being asked to pay more money for a car that, in their eyes, had a less prestigious engine, 2 fewer driven wheels, and normal doors. To say they were unhappy is a spectacular understatement. Many felt they had been duped and demanded their £50,000 deposits back. Jaguar, however, refused to issue refunds. They argued that the deposit contracts were legally binding and that they had delivered a car that met or exceeded the primary performance promise of the concept. A bitter and very public battle ensued. A group of disgruntled buyers formed the XJ220 Action Group and took Jaguar to court, claiming they had been missold the car. They argued that the changes to the specification were so fundamental that the final car was not the one they had agreed to buy. The press had a field day, painting Jaguar as an arrogant corporation, strong-arming its own loyal customers. The legal fights dragged on, creating a toxic atmosphere around the car. The courts, however, mostly sided with Jaguar. As if the legal battles and specification arguments weren't bad enough, the Jaguar XJ220 was launched into the teeth of a global economic hurricane. The speculative boom of the late 1980s had given way to a brutal recession in the early 1990s. People who had blithely dropped £50,000 deposits were now watching property portfolios and stock investments collapse. Easy money and conspicuous consumption vanished overnight. Suddenly, a car costing nearly £500,000 looked less like an investment and more like a catastrophic liability. In the UK, it was made worse by Black Wednesday, Sept 1992. The government withdrew the pound from the ERM, causing chaos in the markets and deepening the recession. The timing could not have been worse. As the first XJ220s rolled out of the Bloxham factory, their target buyers were being financially decimated. Many paper millionaires simply couldn't complete their purchases. The supercar bubble had burst. The entire supercar market imploded. Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Porsches, the XJ220, with its enormous price tag and ongoing controversies, was hit particularly hard. For a while, the XJ220 looked destined to be remembered as an expensive, ill-timed failure. Amidst all the courtroom drama and economic gloom, one question remained: was it actually fast? To answer this, Jaguar took the XJ220 to the place where supercar legends are made or broken, the Nardo test track in southern Italy. This is a perfect 7.8-mile circle purpose-built for high-speed testing. In 1992, with future Formula One winner Martin Brundle at the wheel, the XJ220 set out to prove its point. The result was emphatic. The car hit a staggering 217.1 miles per hour, making it, for a brief period, the fastest production car in the world. There's a small footnote to this record. The test car had its catalytic converters removed and its rev limiter raised slightly to achieve that ultimate speed, which led some critics to cry foul. However, even in full road-legal trim, the car had been officially clocked at 212.3 miles per hour, a speed that was still more than enough to silence most of the doubters. The engineers had delivered. The car may not have had a V12, but it was phenomenally, terrifyingly fast. The name XJ220 was an ambition, but hitting 217 was a reality that put it ahead of rivals like the Ferrari F40 and Lamborghini Diablo. The top speed was only part of the story. The XJ220's acceleration was equally brutal. Thanks to the massive torque from the twin-turbo V6, it could launch from 0 to 60 miles per hour in just 3.6 seconds. This was mind-bending performance for the early 1990s, the kind of acceleration that rearranged your internal organs. On the track, it was a formidable machine. It even went to Le Mans in 1993 and won its class, only to be disqualified later on a technicality regarding, you guessed it, its catalytic converters. The car just couldn't seem to catch a break. So, the numbers were there. The performance was undeniable. The engineers at TWR and Jaguar Sport had done their job brilliantly. They had taken a flawed concept and forged it into a world-beating supercar. The XJ220 was a true 200-mile-per-hour machine. The tragedy was that by the time it proved its mettle, many people had stopped listening. For years, after production ended in 1994, the Jaguar XJ220 languished in the automotive wilderness. A total of just 281 cars were built, far short of the original plan. Values remained stubbornly low, with cars trading for a fraction of their original list price. It was seen as the supercar that got it all wrong. Wrong engine, wrong drivetrain, wrong timing, wrong price. The initial press reviews were often a mix of awe at its speed and disappointment at its story. It existed in the shadow of its own broken promises and in the shadow of another, more famous V6-powered supercar that arrived at the same time, the McLaren F1. But then, slowly, things began to change. As the years passed, the baggage of the launch controversy started to fade. People began to look at the XJ220 not for what it wasn't, but for what it was. They saw a stunningly beautiful, hand-built aluminium supercar. They saw a car with a genuine racing engine that delivered crushing performance. They saw a car that was incredibly rare. The very things that made it a commercial failure, the low production numbers, were now starting to make it a desirable collector's item. The pariah was beginning its long, slow journey to becoming an icon. Today, the Jaguar XJ220 is rightly regarded as one of the great analog supercars. It has no traction control, no paddle shift gearbox, and no driver aids to save you from your own incompetence. It demands respect and skill to drive fast, offering a pure, unfiltered experience that modern supercars cannot replicate. This purity, combined with its rarity and dramatic story, has made it a blue-chip classic. At major auctions, pristine examples now command prices well over £500,000, soaring past their original retail price. The car that once couldn't be given away is now a prized possession. In the end, the XJ220 is a car of glorious contradictions. It was an engineering triumph born from a marketing disaster. It was a car built by a secret club of enthusiasts that ended up in court. It promised a V12 and delivered a V6, yet still became the fastest car in the world. Its story is a lesson in how passion can clash with pragmatism, and how perception can be more powerful than reality. Was it a broken promise? Yes. Was it a misunderstood supercar? Absolutely. But above all else, it's a magnificent, flawed, and utterly captivating machine that has, against all odds, earned its place as a true automotive legend.